Well, good afternoon. And I always have to laugh. You know, those of you, I think most folks, I know we have some people from out of town, but most folks I think have probably lived here for a while, am I guessing? So I always have to laugh when Alan gets introduced as an aide, because, you know, he was city councilor for 20 years, county commissioner for another 20 years, something like that. So anyway, we're lucky to have him at the city, and he's a great connection point if any of you have follow-up questions or things that you're working on. He's really a gateway for me, for the public, to then go into departments like zoning and planning and things you might be interested in. So a couple of things that I want to share with you today. Firstly, this is the first time I've been in this room since my election campaign. There was a debate here, actually, and I forget which group put it on. It was not real estate folks. But anyway, it's good to be back and not have to share the stage with 9 other candidates. So what I'd like to do with you today is share, I think, some kind of high-level thoughts about where our city's at, what we have to do going forward, and then I can save some time for a few questions if that's helpful to folks. Let me also just mention, by way of background, less so on the commercial side, but my father was actually a realtor for 40 years, mostly residential, but then did commercial inspections for banks. And so actually, you know, I grew up inspecting office buildings under construction. That was, as a little kid, what I would do kind of with him. So anyway, his name's Mike Keller. He's been retired a long time, but a lot of folks in your various companies, I recognize all the names, because that's what I used to spend my weekends doing with my dad. So appreciate the work that you do, and also, you know, want to thank, of course, Donna Diller, I think, who's here, and good to see you, and also Pamela Sullins. Does Pamela make it? Yes. Yeah. And of course, Eileen Fleming from National Headquarters, so thank you so much. Two, this event is something, you know, this luncheon is something that I wanted to do because I want to make sure and try and share where we're at as a city with a lot of different folks in sort of non-traditional venues. You know, I always get NAIOP once a year and, you know, get the Chamber of Commerce once a year and that kind of thing, but I've also learned that the more I can share with folks kind of at their own specific organization, not only do we have better interaction with respect to Q&A, but also I know that not everyone, you know, is part of those or can make it to every event like that. So I'm really trying to make an effort to go to specific industry type events like this. So I appreciate the invite and glad to be here. Now, a couple of things. For folks who are unaware just of my background, very briefly, was born and raised here. And I spent about 10 years outside of Albuquerque and came back home and ended up starting in the state senate. So I was in the state senate for a couple of terms and then was our state auditor before this gig. And so I have a mix of experience, some real strong, actually, private sector experience for about 15 years of my life. I was a graduate of business school, was always in the private sector. And then for the last 10 years have been, you know, I hate to say the word politician, but I guess that's sort of what I am now. So, but have been able to do a number of different things in the course of that. And I think it brings, I come with a certain perspective on our city. And it starts with a little bit about where we are today, but I think also where we've been going in the last 10 years. So today, the reality is our city has lots of challenges. As many of you know from your properties, your buildings, your work, we are awash, unfortunately, in crime. We have a major addiction problem that is driving a lot of that crime. And as you can see, statistically, at least based on last year's statistics, because this year's not done yet, you know, we have some of the highest per capita crime rates in the entire country. Now, obviously, this isn't good news, but I think it's important to share where we're at today. Also, if you've driven downtown, you've noticed something that is a reoccurring phenomenon that continues to get worse, which is that we have a homeless situation that is just exploding downtown. This is the reality of the city we live in. And I think historically, we've been a little bit adrift in dealing with these issues. We have tried many well-intentioned ideas. We've tried a lot of pilot projects. And as we do in Albuquerque, we really try and come together and try and help. Unfortunately, I think these problems are so big that it's going to take more than us sort of coming together around a particular issue like homelessness for a month and then, hoping it sort of trends change and it goes the other way. So I'm going to speak to some of that, but I think one of the big reasons that I believe in our city is also because I've seen this before. If I think back to some of my earliest memories, I actually remember going down to Nob Hill when it was run down in the 80s. I don't know if any of you remember this. Like, Nob Hill was actually not always a bunch of cool restaurants and bars. I used to go down there to buy cassette tapes, which were not 8 tracks, but they were cassette tapes. It was my mom wouldn't let me go to Nob Hill. I mean, it's just unbelievable to think about that now, for public safety reasons. And of course, I know, I was the state senator for the International District. Some of you might remember it by its other name. Our community that I used to represent prefers International District, so I'm going to use that. And I think it's also just good for the city. But that neighborhood, I remember the 90s when, there were the barricades up in there. Do you remember this? And it was like a maze and you couldn't even get through. And it was completely overtaken by Cuban gangs. So I mention these to share that we have a very resilient city. We are a strong community. And I think sometimes we forget, especially if, we didn't grow up here, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if you didn't, you forget. We've been through some tough times before. And they've been in areas that the challenges the International District faces are real and they are severe. They are nothing like it was in the 90s. And anyone who was here during that period, I think, would agree with that. So I share that because I do believe there is hope. There are some things we can do, and I think we are going to turn the corner. And I think part of that is even in our DNA as such a resilient community. Now, the first step in that, though, is calling it like it is. And that's why I wanted to share with you initially where we are at. And also, I think there's something about not trying to find a one-off solution. I think we have tried that as a city over the last 5, 6, however many years. And the problems are so challenging in our city, there is no silver bullet. There is no idea that we can copy from Portland and dump here that is going to change everything. There is no one-off project from Denver or anywhere else that is going to transform all of these issues. Now, I'm a believer in best practices. I would not be doing justice to my Harvard Business School degree if I didn't honor that. So it's not that we don't have anything to learn from other cities. And especially in your profession, you know all of this wonderful placemaking and development that we can do and should do in our city. But I want to mention that I don't believe there is a quick win. This is going to be hard. We are going to have to get out of this rut over the course of several years, and it means addressing these issues from all sides, not just a one-off solution. So I'll speak to that in, I think, just a minute, but I love football analogies. So for those of you who are like football fans, this isn't about like a long bomb or a trick play that's going to win us the game. This is about a slow ground game that is going to win us, like a season. That's what we have to do as a city. And I think, unfortunately, we've resisted that in the past. Not because we didn't want to do it. I think because genuinely we thought, well, this homelessness thing, it'll probably just go away when the economy picks up. Or crime, it's just a temporary thing and we'll work through it. I don't believe that, actually. These are real problems. And we're now at an inflection point where I think our city is faced over the next 4 or 5 years with a real directional choice. We used to be, when I was growing up here, in the same breath as Denver, as Phoenix, as, Austin back then was like, they were like our little brother. Over the course of 10, 20 years, we have slowly slipped. Those are no longer our peers. Salt Lake is another good example. The mountain megas, this was a thesis from the Brookings Institute in the 90s. We were part of it. Now we're not. The question is, where are we going as a city? Are we going to be a place that is recognized nationally as a multicultural, vibrant community that is beautiful in the Southwest that the rest of the country knows about? Or are we going to go down a different path that a lot of cities have gone down in the Midwest? I don't want to particularly pick on any city near us, but is our peer group going to be Lubbock? Is this where we're going? I actually believe in the next 5 years that is the choice before us. That is the choice that we're going to have to make as a community. But I do believe that it's a choice. But that choice is based on, one, acknowledging where we're at, acknowledging where we have to go, and then trying to understand how we can actually make that deliberate choice to get back up to that tier of cities that we were at before in terms of world-class national reputation. So, how do we do that going forward? I, as I mentioned, don't have a magical silver bullet that I'm going to share with you, but I got a recipe, some things we've got to work on. So first, with respect to crime, as of yesterday, we got a permanent police chief. That's step one, so thank you. That search, if folks want to have questions on it, but it was fascinating. One thing that I learned, if anyone knows Chief Geyer, one thing is he's already shown the capacity to learn, which I think for a chief of police is a huge deal. But what I learned in that search, we interviewed amazing law enforcement professionals from Seattle, from some smaller towns, but very legitimate crime problems also. And the amazing thing is, our chief is a baller chief. Like, he is a really good candidate. And the irony is, what we realized after going through this is we're glad he's not applying for other jobs, because he could easily beat out all these other chiefs that are applying for jobs in bigger cities. Now, luckily, he's raising his grandkids here, and he's very tied to the community and so forth. But I'm just saying, I think I gotta say, like, there are some people in our community who are extremely good at what they do, probably some in this room. I will tell you that on paper, even no matter what happens in the future, like, our chief is a national world-class or national class police chief of police. And that's something I don't think we appreciated until we looked around and realized even people who were interviewing for that job said, the current chief is pretty good. That's amazing when people are telling you that, and they're from cities like Seattle, that are much bigger and so forth. So anyway, I want to get back on sort of some other things we're doing on crime. So the other thing is we restructured APD. We are pushing everything outside of City Hall and back into the community. This means opening substations again. It's going to take all summer, but we started yesterday by opening the Nob Hill substation finally. There's a substation kind of right over there that's tiny up on Montgomery. Actually, it'd be right over there. And then there's another one in Old Town, which, right, for all sorts of reasons when you go down there. We want to try and get those open again for all sorts of reasons. Then we're trying to get back to this notion of community policing, and this is the modern version of the beat cop. We're trying to have officers who are actually in the same area for a long amount of time, and they get to know the neighbors, typically through a neighborhood association, which I know is its own kind of category of issues, but that is something that we used to have that brought crime down. We had some of the lowest crime rates that we'd seen in recent memory from kind of 2000 to 2010. And so that was because we went all in on community policing. It was also because we staffed up. Now, again, I'm not saying there's one single solution, but I know about 20 years ago when I was in high school, is that right? Maybe 25 years ago, we had roughly 1,100 cops. Today we have 850. And we are losing them. This is the amazing thing. Despite all the talk, as of 2017, we are still net losing officers. So we have to work on all of these, but we have some good news on this front too. Number one, unfortunately, council did have this tax increase, but we're using it for more officers. We have to fund more officers. We had cut back on officers because crime was so low. So it made sense. Why do we have all these cops? So we stopped having, we had academy classes of like 11 one year. And we were encouraging people to retire because crime was low and we had too many officers. But then crime went up and we had too few officers. So again, I don't want to dwell too much on like the past or why we got here. Happy to speak to that if folks want. I know this, there is no way you can police Albuquerque with 850 officers. So the good news is now we've got the resources. Those start flowing July 1. It's going to take a little bit of a time to ramp up, but I will tell you what a difference this makes already. We announced 43 candidates in our academy class. That is the largest class, I think, in 3 or 4 years in Albuquerque. Thank you. And we've also got 22 lateral hires in the queue coming in. That is also the largest amount of lateral hires we've had in multiple years. So you can see, at the end of the day, I do not want to reduce everything down to like economics and pay, but I cannot poach an officer from Phoenix by saying, you got to take a 15% pay cut, we'd like you to come to Albuquerque. So the good news is we've fixed this, and this has to do with collective bargaining and all of this, but we are investing as a city, as of July 1, in law enforcement. And so now we've got to execute. But if we hadn't done that, I got to tell you, wouldn't have a chance. I'd be giving this same speech 4 years from now without that. So we've got a chance when it comes to crime. The other thing is the DOJ. We've completely reset our relationship with the Department of Justice. And the challenge there, if you're unaware of this, they literally kind of control in many ways our police department because of the use of force problems that we had. And we can debate those, but they are what they are. And I think what I learned from the last administration is there's no question who is in charge. His name is Judge Brack. And he doesn't have to answer to anyone. And so if you think somehow there is some way we can get out of this $7 million a year DOJ issue that you read about in the paper, forget it. It is here to stay until we actually fix it. And so I'm committed to fixing it. It's taken other cities 10, 20 years. I hope it doesn't take that long. But I know this, I'm not going to try and avoid it because it's not going away. So we are full speed ahead on DOJ reforms. Now, the last thing I want to mention, especially for your commercial properties, is this notion of like the real-time crime center. You might have heard of this. You might have heard that crime can be reduced if you plug your cameras into our cameras. The amazing thing about this, it is totally true. In fact, it's so true, just putting up the stickers reduces crime. So if you don't know anything about this or you haven't heard about this, contact our real-time crime center. Alan Armijo can put you in touch with them. I will tell you there is a bit of like a technology bandwidth problem. So also some of you might have experienced this, like you're like, okay, I want to sign up. And then you talk to us and you're like, well, I don't want to spend 20 grand on a new security system. I understand that, but we are working pretty fast around that. And we're trying to do this in our schools to keep our kids safe. And we're actually making progress with APS on this. The ART project is now literally going to be a essentially crime spotting detection unit all the way up and down Central. Because the cameras are there, we're just trying to get the wires tied together. And we're actually, within the next few months, we'll be able to do that. But the amazing thing about this is then you layer it on with this other technology around license plate readers. And so if we can do this, and I believe we can in the next 3 or 4 months, we are going to have license plate readers for stolen cars all up and down Central. That is going to be a game changer for our city because we have learned that auto theft is one of these bizarre crimes where historically the theory was, you know what, auto theft, no one gets, usually they're not killed or hurt. You just get your car stolen. And we know that's bad. And the theory was what you want is your paperwork promptly filled out so you can get your insurance, you can get a new car. I respect that, but it turns out auto theft is a much, much bigger issue because it is literally the vehicle, literally and figuratively, the vehicle that is driving crime up in all other areas. So like when your house is broken into, it's with a stolen car. When drugs are being exchanged and people are being trafficked, the currency that is used instead of cash is a stolen car. So you need to either fund drugs or pay off a debt, you just steal a car. That's how this works in the current setup, unfortunately, in our sort of, crime economy. It's all based on cars. So if you reduce auto theft, you literally are reducing the transaction ability for all these other crimes. So that is actually why we are focusing on auto theft again. And the good news is we've seen a small dip in crime for the first time in several years. And we think literally it is because it's harder to buy drugs with the car. It's harder to steal it's harder to break into your house with a stolen car. All these other activities are related to the car. So anyway, the irony is if you go after stolen cars, you're actually going after all these other crimes. It's very counterintuitive. And I want to respect at least the old model, which was this. All we should go after is violent crime, homicide, because that's, when lives are actually at stake. The new theory all over the country is that it's actually the opposite. Those take the longest to prosecute and they're the hardest to deal with. And the irony is that element that is actually doing that, they're all using cars. And if they can't get cars right away, they're not actually going to shoot each other over debts and things like this. So it's very counterintuitive because you're not going after that most violent crime. But I think what we've learned is that just going after homicide and prioritizing homicide has just not worked. If you look at it, and it's still not working because homicide is the one thing that's still up. So we are trying to attack it from all sides, but that also means going after stolen cars. And lastly, it means pulling you over. So traffic stops are up 50%. This is all part of having a society that we are saying laws matter, rules matter, but part of catching stolen cars is pulling people over for traffic stops and registration and so forth. So anyway, I'll stop sort of the lecture on crime, but these are the things we are trying to do, and at least I have confidence that this is the right path to go down. Again, referring back to this notion of a silver bullet, the idea was that if we focused in one specific area with one specific method, crime would go down. That method failed. It has not worked in Albuquerque, so we are opening it back up, and we're doing all these things together, and we're bringing in reinforcements. Now, let me touch on, and then I'm going to kind of glance here at the clock so I save a little bit of time for questions, a little bit on economic development and placemaking. So our economic development strategy is it's partially out in terms of the criteria the city's going to use, but it works something like this. Number one, we want to support everyone else who's doing economic development, especially in the private sector, and also companies or organizations like AED. So we want to recruit firms to come here. We want them to use your guys' services and find buildings and all of that. And we're actually finding a way to actually increase what we're doing for that through AED. But in the city, we're going to try and do something different. We are going to try and focus on growing companies that are already here and preventing the flight of companies to Phoenix and California and Denver. So in City Hall, we're going to focus on retention, and then with AED as our partner, we're going to focus on recruitment with them. This is actually something that the city has never done. The city has never focused on that. So it's a new idea. It's not revolutionary conceptually, but hopefully it's going to help. And so this is one example where if you have clients who are like, well, we want an office building in Albuquerque, but we're also looking at office buildings in Denver, call our office. That's where we want to deploy incentives, other tools that we can use to help. The other side of this is around placemaking. So I'll give you a good example. We should pick on I think, and it is somewhat fun because it's Topgolf. The issue du jour in terms of this debate is playing out in the Topgolf argument that you might have read about in the papers. And I just want to let you know, I would love to have Topgolf here. And I think especially with private property, people, great, they can move here wherever they want. The amazing thing is, in total, what they're asking for is $4.75 million of taxpayer money to subsidize their move here. And that's just like a mathematical fact. That is what it is. And conceptually, there's nothing wrong with that. You should ask for it, et cetera. However, we're trying as a city, when it comes to taxpayer money or city land, there, I believe, is a little bit of a different criteria. Not everyone can get that because we only have finite amount of money to do that. We have tax increment districts in Winrock. We have tax increment districts in Mesa del Sol. Those would both be existing avenues where they could achieve those kinds of savings. We also have entertainment areas like around Century Rio or just pick your area where there's ancillary development, because I'm very interested in placemaking. The one thing I've learned from other mayors and from ULI and other organizations is that the mark of a city, and it's essentially its greatness, when you get past its people and its scenery, it is about its places and the degree to which those places are connected. And this is this notion of placemaking. This is what most of the development, you guys are way more familiar with this than I am. But it's this idea that you have to have sort of the ancillary benefit, right? Parking Topgolf in the middle of a warehouse district, I think there are better locations for it. And when you want $4.7 million of public taxpayer dollars, we should have that conversation. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to really have that. So that's kind of the rub there. But that's also okay. That's why we have city council, and the votes will be what they are. But I just wanted to mention that because that is an example where that project, we have 5 criteria for public tax dollar subsidies for real estate development. 1, it has to have an ancillary placemaking effect. 2, it should be economic-based jobs. Right now, you bring an entertainment complex that does pull heavily from Cliffs. It pulls heavily from Hinkle Family Fun. I think everyone understands this. These are not economic-based jobs, just from an economic standpoint. Number 3, we want it to be a growing industry where perhaps there'll be others that will sort of come with it. That may or may not be the case. That's sort of an interesting question. Number 3, we want just a demonstrated return on investment. And right now, we are subsidizing $21,000 per FTE that Topgolf wants to hire. That's our taxpayer money that we're going to subsidize for 10 years. That seems really high because CSI Aviation, some of you might know them, they got a subsidy to help do some rehab at the airport. We are subsidizing $3,000 an FTE for them, and they're local. and they're economic-based jobs. And then here comes an entertainment venue that's charging us $21,000. So we just wanted to pencil out, and this is only with taxpayer dollars. It's not a comment on the private sector. So I wanted to highlight that. I think the good news is it's Topgolf. Like, it's not going to change the city one way or the other. But I will tell you, it is an example of a project that is not in step with how I believe the city should be subsidizing private development. Now, I think let me just wrap up with this. I can talk about the art project if people want. I can talk more about homelessness. We have some interesting things that we're cooking up there. But I do believe that here's where I think we can go as a city. We're going to try and paint a picture as a city to our community, the business community, to everyone as residents, even beyond, that we are one community and we have to come together and realize that we're all in this and we rise and fall as one. You can't be successful in commercial real estate if our city is stricken with crime and homelessness. That's not lost on you. We also can't have continuing fights with APS over our education system from a city perspective. We've got to come together and try and find a way to help. This is why we're pushing after-school programs. When we do recruitment, we're going to be asking the business community to help us with recruiting once we get that whole program set up at APD. And it's this notion of one Albuquerque. For better or worse, that is our brand. Nobody moves here from California because they think high desert is awesome. They move here because they know of Albuquerque, and then someone else sells them on high desert, or Los Ranchos, or wherever it is, or Rio Rancho. I'm just saying this, like, we are, whether you like it or not, we are Albuquerque. That is our brand. That's what we have to stand for. And that's why I need help as your new mayor to come together on these core initiatives, because I believe that if we can do things like actually fix downtown, it does help the entire region. And in fact, it helps the entire state. It's just the structure of our economy and of our geography. And so that's why over the next several months, you're going to see a series of initiatives being rolled out, whether it's one-on-one volunteering, whether it's investing with us in police recruiting, whether it's investing with us in after-school programs for our kids. We're going to try and come together as a city and say that we have to address these issues head on. And I think if we do that, we can get back to that peer group. We can be in the same breath as Salt Lake and as Denver and other cities in the Southwest. Because we have one thing that no one can compete with. We actually have two. One is our climate and our natural beauty, and the other one is our cultural diversity. We win every time when we compete on those. We've just got to take care of crime, homelessness, our economy, and help out our kids. So with that, let me conclude, and we've got a little bit of time for questions wherever you'd like to go next. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few words. Thanks. You want to do a few questions? Up to you. Your show.
I'd like to hear more about homelessness.
Okay.
Yeah, as property managers, we chronically deal with it all over the city. I know there's pockets of it where it's worse, but our landlords are incurring a lot of costs cleaning up after them. We're constantly dealing with the ramifications of the destruction that they do at the properties. So you mentioned you're working on some initiatives on this?
Yes. So a couple of things. Number one, we had, and it's a great question. I'm going to try and concisely answer it, but we're doing a lot. So number one, the city never had a homeless policy person. The interesting thing about homelessness in the city is literally when I came into office, I started asking around our family and community services department. I was like, all right, let's talk homelessness. We got to get our handle on this. And there was no one. Our city historically has outsourced dealing with homelessness 100%. And it has been with the best of intentions. It's St. Martin's, it's The Rock, it's healthcare for the homeless. And I mention this because we have tried so hard, but we've never stepped up as a city. So the first thing we're doing is we are saying, you know what? City Hall's got to have a hand in this too. This is a priority for taxpayers. So we now have a deputy director of homelessness. Her name is Lisa Huval, and she is an expert in these issues, homelessness and housing. So for specific issues, Alan can connect you with her. Number two, we have decided that we're going to try and invest in this as a city with your taxpayer money. I'm just being very straightforward. This is like a good question. What do you use with taxpayer money? Do you use it on Topgolf, or do we use it on homelessness? Today, now, I believe it's homelessness. So we are building, number one, I signed off on a 40-unit supportive housing complex that is going to be the first one in almost a decade for the folks who are sort of the frequent flyers. They're causing the most problems, meaning they're not immediately hireable. And they're also not doing something that would end them up in jail. They're just, whether it's behavioral health or mental health, these folks have to have a place to live. And there's really no other way to deal with them. So one is we're doing that. That's the good news. That's already signed off on and paid for. Second thing is we're visiting and we're bringing half the town with us. If anyone wants to come, we're looking with the Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce, actually. It's San Antonio's model. I believe that we have to do two things, and this is the real answer to your question. Number one is there's an ordinance now against, I forget how they phrase it, but I'm going to get it wrong, but it's the anti-panhandling ordinance and loitering, whatever that's called, safe streets or something like that. As you can tell, I don't really put a premium on like the politically correct words on that, which I should learn. But that ordinance is in place. The courts are preventing us from enforcing it right now. So we are asking for an early resolution to the court questions on civil liberties, on whether or not we can do that. We think actually a lot of it will be enforceable, some of it might not be. And so what we are committed to is basically this. I'm gonna make a sort of compact with folks who are having issues and out on the street. One, once we get this set up, you can't just have a homeless encampment, whether it's on your doorway or whether it's in a park. That's not gonna fly anymore. We have to take back the public domain. But we are going to take you to a place where we can get you the services that you need for help. The challenge is right now, we don't have either of those. So it's gonna be a while. I don't have a quick fix on this other than we've got to get that ordinance figured out. That's that one piece. And then the second piece is, I do believe as a city we are gonna have to build, and I know there's gonna be a question of where and all of this, we have to have somewhere to take people, like literally for that one night. And let me maybe close with this. Here's what we do now. If it's the winter, we take you to the winter shelter out on the west side. And the good news is you don't freeze to death. That it functions for that purpose. But if you go visit that shelter, you see the need for something that is year-round. People live there all winter, and we put them through this amazing high-cost activity where we bus them there, they stay the night, and then we bus them back, and we don't provide them with all the services that we could. And this has somehow been our solution to homelessness. So we've got to own up. We are just like every other big city. We've got to have call it what you want, a multiple crisis, full spectrum unit center, but it's this notion that like you can take somebody to a place where they can spend the night and then get the help they need, whether it's addiction, whether it's job training, whether it's housing placement. Until we do that, we will never be able to solve your problem. But I do believe we're gonna invest in that over the next few years, and I think if we do those two things, we are at least doing all we can as a city to prevent homelessness or to deal with homelessness. But also, it is a national trend. I just got back from the Conference of Mayors, and like every mayor is talking about this. San Diego, Denver, it's exploding all over the country. So I try and not blame national trends, so I'm not going to. I'm just going to say, let's do all we can, which are those two things, and the rest we're going to have to call on partners. All right, so I've got time for one more. Then I got to go back to work. But this is great. Yes?
Which is kind of, didn't realize this, that stolen vehicles have become kind of the currency for drug debts or whatever debt you might have. It seems like, at least from our perspective, we're a heating air conditioning contracting company. We used to get our yard broken into continually, stealing copper, stealing aluminum, stealing, But it seems like that's calmed down. And when you said that, I wonder if those people quit stealing copper and they started stealing cars. So if you push them out of cars, they get back to copper.
Is the price of copper up or down? That's that's usually what's correlated to the copper theft. But
there was a discussion when copper theft was so big that the recyclers were not going to be. There was a push to stop the recyclers from giving cash.
Yeah.
That they had to mail a check to a physical address.
in fact, I helped sponsor this law, Senator Novell and I at the state legislature. It took us 6 years, but in my last year, we sponsored the Copper Theft Reform Act, which enabled all sorts of that and really. Well, thank you. I mean, it's actually, I think it made a difference. So I was going to say the first thing I want to do is take a tiny bit of credit for copper theft going down. But you raise a really good point, and there's this theory, right, that crime just moves. Sometimes it's copper, sometimes it's auto theft, et cetera. Here's the problem with cars, and not to say that what was happening to your businesses was better than what's happening to people's cars, but cars are so mobile that that's one huge problem. And for example, so the recyclers, right? I think there was like 7 copper recyclers or something that we had to work with. With cars, it's this notion of chop shops, and we saw this. We had this huge bust out in Moriarty that was all Albuquerque stolen cars that were getting, revinned and resold. So it's almost like a banking system. And I think the issue why cars are becoming more and more popular is because of the idea that they're easily tradable. It's sort of like, it's just an easier currency to convert than even copper. It's also safer, because remember, like, a lot of times when they would catch copper folks, they were getting electrocuted. Yeah. And so, and there's also this thing which I just have to share, because it's so, if you go online and you watch this, somewhere around, we started having car alarms, and then we started having better locking doors, so you couldn't just, pick the lock. Now the way cars are made, there's this problem with how easy it is to open the door. And so this is something like, this has nothing to do with being a mayor or whatever, but the amazing thing is if you watch how all these cars are being stolen, there's this like rubber balloon that you blow into either the door crease, or there's like this little like air pump that you just push into the door handle, and it pops open right away. So there is this bizarre thing where like it is now easier to break into a car than it ever has been, which is so counterintuitive. And if you see this, like literally, it takes 10 seconds. You just like pop this air thing into your keyhole. So that is an issue. And when we had heavy car thefts in the 90s, that's when alarms came around, and that's when we started also having it so it's harder to hotwire a car. We do have to look a little bit at that technology, because right now it's like literally, I have a nephew who showed me this on YouTube, how easy it is to break into a car. And if you just buy online for $10 this rubber balloon thing, you can get it in any car you want. So that's also why they don't always steal your car. Those are the people who don't know how to hotwire a car. They're just breaking into it to rummage around in there. That's what they're doing. And it is like painfully easy. So, we need to work on that kind of as a country. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your lunch. Thank you.